Respected Chair, Professor Ashutosh Kumarji, Co-Chair, Professor Elizabeth Elbil, and dear colleagues and friends. Once again, I thank the organizers, Haryana Central University and Hans Seidel, especially Chanchal, for giving me this opportunity. So without wasting much time, I'll start with my presentation. I think recently there has been a lot of talk about federalism, that it is trying to figure out how well, power sharing works in managing crises, which are mostly caused by ongoing pandemic. But surprisingly, you'll see that most workshops that have been held on emergency management in federal countries before 2020, they never thought about how global pandemic would affect federations and how they would work. But in the last 2 years, different levels of governments, they have worked together and they have talked, with each other in ways that have never been seen before to stop the disease. And there's no way around the fact that Constitution gives, federal governments the power to deal with national crisis or emergencies. Still, I would say that states, provinces, cantons, or local governments, they are in charge of health and the services that go along with it. Now, the way the federal government handles the pandemic level emergencies and the uncertainty that they cause, that is very unique to each federation. Also, I would say that the policymakers, they took advantages of the different federal models that were available and they came up with solutions that fit each other in each situation. So I would now talk about two important aspects that shape decision-making in federations. The first aspect pertains to the onus of making or taking decisions. Now, whether the central government or subnational units, they are taking decisions. The second aspect deals with whether the decision is centralized or coordinated. Now, both aspects, influence the performance of federations. And both central government and the constituent units, they play a very significant role in having, legitimacy to decide on public policy. So in that context, there's a possibility, to figure out the decision making, whether it is centralized or decentralized decision. A centralized decision making and a resultant, policy applies to the entire federation, and this is mainly to ensure uniform implementation across the federation. And these are mainly decisions which are made by the central government, but they are also implemented by subnational units. On the other hand, when we talk about, constituent units that undertake same process and policy making, it is decentralized decision making. And an essential point of consideration is that the application of same rules or policy only is in the constituent units only. So the impact of decentralized decision making may or may not be visible across the country. Now, another important point that I would like to make here is that decision making cannot only be centralized or decentralized. The interactions that take place between different levels of government, they also shape the decision making. Now, this way, decisions can be unilateral or coordinated in their formulation and implementation. So when central government do not consult or discuss, or obtain agreements of the constituent units and do not issue any joint statements or choose a joint strategy, it leads to unilateralism. As India was criticized in the first way. So this unilateralism is not just the unique part of federal government. Even you'll find that constituent units can implement unilateral decisions. For example, Kerala model or Odisha model, they also took many decisions without consulting the center. So it can be either way. Now, on the contrary, the coordinated decision-making implies, where multiple levels of governments jointly engage in decision-making, amending or abolishing a policy measure. Now, this level of coordination explains how governments are involved in communication, exchange of information, negotiation, defending or adjusting their standpoints. Thus, coordination paves the way for joint declarations or agreements at intergovernmental meetings. Now, if we combine the two aspects, we will reach, towards varying approaches to decision making in federal systems, and that has been discussed by several studies. The first model, I would say, it can lead to centralized or unilateral decision making. When central government makes decision without consulting or coordinating with the constituent units. The second model can be centralized but coordinated model decision making. That is when the central government takes a decision, but by coordinating with the constituent units. That was, I would say, noticed in India in the subsequent, second wave or third wave. The third model can be decentralized decision making but unilateral. For instance, when subnational units do not make any consultation with the federal government before making decision. And the last model can be, in form of decentralized but coordinated decision making, when constituent units coordinate with federal government and with each other. But as per these studies, you will find that absolutely it was not achieved in any federal federation, during the COVID. So during the time of crisis, if the federal government enacts a legislation or issues guidelines, and if the constituent units implement it, then any coordination will only ensure successful implementation. So coordination in decision implementation is set to facilitate cohesive and consistent delivery and to avoid, duplication of efforts. So as understood from cases, worldwide, a pandemic level crisis, I would say, paves the way for a centralized decision making. And such centralizing tendencies, they seek to avoid, harmful effects of competition between subnational units, especially, I would say, during crisis times at the level of policy intervention. So it has also been observed that, whether it is citizens or transnational organizations like World Health Organization, all expect, the federal government to play a key role in the damage control. And if unsuccessful, the failures are accrued to them instead of constituent units. So, however, it would be wrong to say that we cannot, expect any decentralized decision making during crisis. And we saw in case of India also, as mentioned by Papi and Wilfred, Kerala, and there were so many other. Kerala was the first one to announce this devolutionary financial package, and that was replicated by the center and other states. So and then other states, like we had Bhilwara model, Delhi model, Agra model, Noida model. So and that was replicated by other states. And so in the transplanetary crisis like pandemic, I would say the federal governments worldwide expect to pursue a centralized approach to managing such crisis. Now, this is mainly to avoid, any subnational competition and to ensure uniformity. So especially, if the infection rates are rising rapidly, it is more viable to expect a coordinated response to such a situation, because exchanging information and pooling resources, they are very critical response in containing the outbreak of the pandemic. Now, in case of India, I would say its striking response has been reflective of co-action between the central government and the state governments. And such a response has endorsed the claim that a single level of government cannot handle this pandemic independently. Now, the intergovernmental collaboration that was noticed during the lockdowns proved, efficacious in tackling the first wave. And whether the first wave or the second wave, I would say that the virtual meetings that took place between the Prime Minister and the video conferences with the Chief Minister, state executives, that has been a salient reminder of existence of executive federalism in India. And states also extended their support in implementing the lockdown measures while seeking additional financial support from the center to alleviate their challenging fiscal situations. Although, remarkable cooperation between center and states, I would say, was witnessed, but there were disagreements also. And between the two levels of the governments in the approach to controlling the pandemic outbreak, and in between the two lockdowns, in between the lockdowns during the first wave, the state of Kerala has been, the case study has been already discussed, but I just want to refer to one point that Kerala was in friction with the Ministry of Home Affairs due to the state's decision to implement restricted reopening of restaurants and allow public transit relaxation, which the central government considered to be violative of the lockdown guidelines that were issued by the Ministry of Health. And further, I would say that the hasty imposition of the stringent lockdown in the first wave, that invited criticism, from all corners. And moreover, late response to the second wave compromised any success that was achieved during tackling the first wave due to vaccine diplomacy that was being followed by the government of India. And outright, consultation of the state governments from the very beginning, I think, of the pandemic would have ensured a better management of COVID outbreak. Furthermore, I would say that the fiscal arrangements, Chanchal is an expert and he has already presented in detail, but I just want to refer to a few points. That fiscal arrangement between federal government and states, they also suffered during this period, and especially the Indian constituent units had to undergo severe economic stress, and resultantly, it was expected of the central government to release timely GST compensation under a more relieving fiscal stimulus package. And as a result, there was also a demand to increase the state's capacity to borrow funds from the center unconditionally. But this was my colleague Ajay Kumar, Professor Ajay is also, he also works on fiscal federalism. So they will discuss more maybe. But I would say, but this was not as a result, there was a demand to increase state's capacity to borrow funds from center unconditionally. But this was not guaranteed to the state. And only, I would say only 0.5% of the increased borrowing limit of 5% of the GSDP was unconditional. So the conditional requirement for borrowing mandated the states to implement initiatives for achieving reforms in power sector, urban development and job creation. So this was also conditional. So I think I would just conclude by saying that there can exist, centralized decision making in a federation, but that does not take away the federal spirit. In a dualist federation like India, it is clear that no single level of government could have handled the pandemic on its own. And the best part of the coordinated response was how the central government gave, the states more freedom to run their own businesses, and how the next levels of government helped to deal the crisis. Of course, we saw fiscal and policy centralization, but if you look at it phase by phase in India, you will see that India's federal response, changed from one-sided centralization in the first wave to a coordinated decentralization in the second wave and later waves. So taking a look at India's example and how other, federal governments have responded, one thing is very clear, that pandemic level crisis has only made it more important to find a balance between decentralization and centralization. No matter what kind of federal system a country had, almost, every federation had a tendency to centralize in order to deal with and also stop the pandemic, except maybe, according to some studies, Germany, and to some extent UK. Maybe Wilfred can tell more about it. In future, what I think is the best way to deal with the pandemic in India and other federations will be to, in my view, to make decisions in a way that is coordinated but not centralized. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Rekha, for the insights and also for sticking to the time very diligently. This helps us. And of course, I mean, the important issue is always the shared role. And we have been opening also a bit this conference by saying that shared role is often underestimated. And we have seen it in the pandemic that this was the case for many countries, that actually in the second phase, then when the subnational constituent units came in, shared rule actually was important. So the big question, and there is no answer to it, I just launch it out before I hand over to Ashutosh for kicking off the discussion session with 2 minutes input. The big question is whether or not basically there will be a kind of a system change in the political systems with regard to more coordination or not, if coordinative bodies actually and links and communication channels keep in place or not, when actually the pandemic becomes the new normal, let's say. So this is the major question we have to deal with, from my point, in the next 10, 15 years when it comes to observing how systems change also with regard to this. Ashutosh?